a vibrant and loving young mother.
She was just an awesome person. She had a little feisty side to her because of the redhead, but she was always looking out for everybody else.
Is found savagely murdered inside an office building washroom.
There was insulated electrical wire used to strangle her.
It appears that there had been a sexual assault.
Detectives pursue multiple suspects.
There were problems with the marriage. They had had issues and arguing.
He was in the building the night she was killed. His prints matched the prints inside the bathroom stall.
And hunt down an elusive killer.
We talked to the attorney who states that he is probably somewhere in South America.
I said, okay, where's he at? Can we get him?
That no one could have imagined.
I was in shock. I couldn't believe it.
It was very unexpected to see him as the actual killer.
Known for its live music scene, Austin, Texas is also one of the safest big cities in the country.
Austin's kind of one of those cool vibe cities, and it's just a very good mix of people.
There's a lot of green belts and parks and creeks and trails. It's a really neat place to live. Austin has not had the kind of crime and the volume of crime as other large cities. People do typically feel safe.
But in 1983, the town is rocked when a local businessman makes a gruesome discovery.
In the early morning hours of September 20th, 1983, the Austin Police Department received a 911 call. One of the tenants of an office complex had come in the morning and discovered things were out of place. There was a cleaning cart out in the hallway, so he went to try to find out if anyone else was still in the building. He did discover a deceased female in the upstairs men's restroom.
The 911 caller did not know her name, but he recognized her as the woman who did clean the building.
Police are dispatched to the scene.
When we located the female victim in the men's restroom, she was positioned inside of the stall.
She was undressed. There was insulated electrical wire that had small loops tied on the ends of them. Detectives believed that electrical wire was used to strangle her and be the cause of her death. It appeared, because she had no defensive wounds at all, that the killer came up from behind and surprised her.
Everything in the crime scene suggested that this was a violent attack.
There was wet toilet paper inside of her nose and her mouth. It stands to reason the killer put that in her mouth and her nose after he strangled her to ensure that she was good and dead.
There was a bodily fluid and a clothing that made it appear as if she was dragged across the floor. Her clothes were scattered amongst the restroom, and it appeared that there had been a sexual assault. The victim was identified by an ID that was found inside of her purse. She was Lori Stout, a 22-year-old female from Austin.
While forensics collect samples, investigators look for other evidence left behind by the killer.
A significant fingerprint was located in the men's stall of the restroom.
When dragging her in there, the person would almost have to brace themselves on the wall of the inside of the stall. The print inside the bathroom stall matched a print on the second floor fire escape. So the two of those were pretty significant.
Had the killer fled through the fire escape after committing the murder? Detectives head down to the parking lot looking for more clues.
They found that there was a spool that was used for insulated electrical wiring inside the dumpster. They also found some looser pieces of the same type of wiring that was used to kill the victim.
Detectives bag the items for analysis. Back inside, police start piecing together a theory of who could have committed this horrible act.
The fact that the victim was killed inside the building in the middle of the night suggested that whoever did this had access or a key to get in it.
Detectives canvass the building and talk to employees, but determined that no one had seen anything suspicious.
We were able to talk with two witnesses that saw Lori at about 12:30 a.m. as they locked up and secured the building and left.
We know that she was last seen alive around 12:30 in the morning, and the employee at the building discovered her body around 8 a.m., so she died sometime during that time frame.
Just as investigators are finishing up, a frantic man arrives at the scene. He identifies himself as Gary Stout and demands to know where his wife Lori is.
Gary Stout told detectives he woke up that morning and discovered that his wife was not home yet from work. He got worried and he drove up to the building, which was a short distance away, and discovered her car still in the parking lot, but it was surrounded by numerous police cars. It was at that point that the police spoke with him and broke the news that his wife was found dead.
He was obviously traumatized by what had happened.
As police take Gary down to the station for questioning, the devastating news spreads to the rest of Lori's family.
I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. My whole world changed. I no longer had my confidant, no longer had my best friend. It was horrible, horrible.
When we found out that Lori had been killed, it was a big impact. It was overwhelming.
Born in Arlington, Virginia in 1960, Lori Coffey was a naturally warm and caring soul.
Lori was the oldest of Lori, myself, and TJ, but she was kind of the mother hen of us all. She had a little feisty side to her, and I think maybe because of the redhead, but she was always looking out for everybody else. She was just an awesome person. She really, truly was.
Lori was the leader of us three musketeers, me, Beverly, and Lori. And she kept us going.
After moving to Austin with her mother and siblings, in 1977, Lori met Gary Stout, who worked logistics for the military.
It all flourished very fast. She was so giddy about Gary, and they fell in love. All in all, he just seemed like a good guy, so we were all, okay, so this is it.
After a whirlwind courtship, Lori and Gary married the following year. 3 years later, Lori became pregnant.
She was over the moon. Very, very happy. I mean, that's what she wanted. She wanted to be married, start having a family, and she was on her way.
Lori is soon forced to face the harsh realities of military family life.
Gary got orders to go to Belgium. She was very sad. Lori was sad that Gary was gone overseas, and here she was facing having a baby on her own at home.
On January 26, 1982, while Gary is away, Lori gives birth to a baby girl.
Lori had a really easy labor, and, now we have this little baby, and, of course, she was ecstatic.
I think that she very much enjoyed being a mother. I think that she experienced probably the happiest months of her life after I was born.
In order to spend more time with his family, Gary left the military and took a job as a maintenance worker in the same building where Lori worked nights as a cleaner.
She was very excited that he was coming home. That's all she wanted, just to be a mom and wife, homemaker.
With her life finally on track, how did this loving young mother become the victim of a cold-blooded killer?
With any investigation, you have to look at those that are closest to the victim and those that have motive. As an employee of the building and maintenance worker there, Gary had access.
Down at the station, police questioned Gary about his marriage to Lori.
When we asked him about any problems in the relationship, he quickly admitted that they had had issues, they had been arguing, and were unhappy.
Detectives discovered that Lori actually went and stayed with her sister, Beverly, shortly before the murder happened because of a really big argument that she had with Gary.
Things were not going all that well for her and Gary, and she was miserable.
This definitely created a concern that there were problems with the marriage. So knowing that he has access and motive, it raises the level of suspicion that he could have been involved in this crime.
Coming up, detectives uncover disturbing secrets.
He wasn't happy in his relationship, and he admitted that he was looking at leaving her.
Lori's family felt very strongly that he was the killer.
Before a shocking tip takes police in a whole new direction.
We received information from a female victim of a man that committed a similar attack against her.
This is a big turning point in the investigation.
Could this be a serial rapist? Could it be a serial murder?
It has detectives risking it all to catch a killer.
He knew it was going to have to be something big for us to find him.
We were holding our breath. We weren't sure it was going to happen.
Police investigating the murder of 22-year-old mother Lori Stout are questioning their first suspect, her husband Gary.
When Gary was being interviewed, he was very forthcoming about the poor state of his marriage with Lori, so it was a little bit of a red flag.
At this point in the investigation, we need additional information about problems that may be in their relationship.
and Gary were happy. When they first got married, she was proud to be a wife. That's all she wanted.
But things changed when Gary returned from overseas.
Lori wanted it to just be like it was before he left, and unfortunately that was not the case.
So knowing the family's account of their relationship as well, knowing that it was a volatile relationship, that created concern that he could have been frustrated with Lori and committed this type of act.
When detectives press Gary for details about why his marriage was falling apart, he makes an alarming confession.
He admitted that he had actually had an affair and was looking at leaving Lori.
Gary tells detectives that he met a woman while overseas and that she had since come to visit him in Austin.
At this point, the detectives are wondering, does Gary want Lori out of the picture given the very bad state of their marriage and the fact that he wants to be with this woman he's having an affair with?
Gary explains that he ultimately chose to stay with Lori, but detectives become even more suspicious after they ask him for an alibi.
He stated that the night before, he and Lori had an argument, so she went and slept on the couch. At one point, she finally just got up in the early morning hours, went to work. Gary did not have an alibi that we could confirm. He was at home with a young child, asleep. He could have left his house, gone up to the building, and come back. That would not be something we could verify.
So the marital difficulties, and now we've got a big fight, and Gary having access to the building. He's somebody that they're looking at pretty hard.
Detectives ask Gary to provide samples of his blood and fingerprints to be compared with evidence found at the crime scene.
He was cooperative with us. He provided samples that were requested.
Looking further into Gary's movements leading up to the murder, investigators reach out to his boss at the office building.
The manager of the building informed the detectives that Gary had fixed a water heater the day before Lori was killed. And he used the same type of electrical wiring that was used to kill Lori.
This was another extremely big flag in the case. All these things together really raised the suspicion that this is the guy.
As police wait for forensic testing results, Lori's autopsy report comes in.
Lori's cause of death was in fact strangulation, and that seemed to match the ligature found at the scene.
What was determined is that a sexual assault had taken place.
They were able to get a sample of semen. However, this is 1983, so there was no DNA testing available. In order to do any comparison, we used blood type antigens. This kind of evidence is helpful in narrowing down the field of suspects.
When we found out how Lori was actually killed, it was disturbing. First thought to my mind, one sick individual. One very sick individual that did it.
Pure evil. Absolute pure evil.
Detectives eagerly receive the results of Gary's fingerprints and blood tests, but they are far from conclusive.
Gary's fingerprints did not match the one inside the stall, but did match prints in the building. But he has access to the building and he is working there. His blood type, it matches the type found in the semen. But of course, Gary is married to Lori, so it's another piece of evidence that can go both ways.
Ultimately, we couldn't use fingerprints or any blood work to exclude him.
Running out of options, detectives try one last method to get to the truth.
Gary Stout was provided an opportunity to take a polygraph. During that interview, he was asked if he was responsible for the murder of Lori, and he advised he wasn't. The results of that polygraph indicated that he was being truthful and there was no deception.
Detectives were surprised that Gary passed the polygraph. Now, detectives have motive, they have access, but no evidence conclusively to show that Gary is in fact the killer.
With nothing to hold him on, Gary is free to go.
At this point, Gary is not ruled out as a suspect, but he takes a little bit more of a backseat.
Looking for new leads, investigators turn their focus back to the numerous employees who work at the building where Lori was killed.
What's difficult, particularly about a public space like this, is so many people have access. We talked to everybody that was a tenant in that building and started working our way through that process. Many of those folks were excluded based on fingerprints, evidence, everything else that could really put them to the side.
But police learned that the building's tenants weren't the only ones who had access that night.
We discovered that registration was being conducted from the University of Texas' satellite location at this office complex. And they stayed late after hours so that folks could come after work and sign up late into the evening. So this was definitely something of interest for us.
Detectives were able to get the names of the male students who had gone in that night, and they had them come down to the police department, and they got fingerprints of these individuals.
Police process the fingerprints of over a dozen students and receive an alarming result.
We were able to rule everyone out on the list with the exception of one. We had a fingerprint inside the men's restroom as well as a fire escape door. So this person is somebody we want to talk to and interview.
Detectives investigating the brutal murder of Lori Stout have just matched a set of crime scene fingerprints with someone who was in the building that night.
The University of Texas was having a sign-up registration at the satellite campus, which allowed people to come after hours in the evenings after work in order to get signed up for classes. So we start going through the list of registrants.
Detectives were able to determine that there was one student whose prints matched the prints inside the bathroom stall where Lori was found, and also on the fire escape door on that second floor.
That individual was identified as Robert Van Weesey, and he was 18 years old.
Investigators interview Robert about his movements on the night Lori was killed.
He told us that he had been there for registration, and on his way out, he used the men's restroom upstairs. Once he was done in the restroom, he exited the fire escape because it was closer to where his vehicle was parked, which would explain why his fingerprints were found in the men's stall and the fire escape door.
Robert Van Weesey did acknowledge that he saw the cleaning lady, which was our victim, Lori, after using the bathroom on the second floor before he exited the building.
Robert tells detectives that he left the building at around 12:15 a.m. Before investigators look to verify his story, they ask Robert for a blood sample to compare to the semen found at the crime scene.
Robert Van Weesey was cooperative. He gave the blood sample at the time, and the detectives submitted it for testing.
There is nothing that we discover on Robert Van Weesey's criminal history or anything else that causes concern. It appears he's had no contact with law enforcement and no violent offenses in the past.
He came from a family that is very well respected. His parents are pretty well-known surgeons in the Austin area. There didn't seem to be anything that would suggest him to behave in this kind of violent way.
While they wait for the results, detectives look for anyone who can corroborate Robert's story.
Detectives interviewed 2 employees of the education office, and they confirmed that they saw Robert Van Weesey leave the building at 12:15. We know Lori was still alive because there were witnesses that confirmed she was alive at 12:30.
With Robert looking less and less like a viable suspect, his blood test results come in.
The analysis of the blood sample told us that Robert was not a match to the bodily fluids found at the crime scene.
The discovery means there is no hard evidence against Robert, and they are forced to let him go.
Robert Van Weesey was ruled out and eliminated as a suspect.
With no new leads, the investigation falters. As weeks pass with no arrests, fear in the community grows.
The nature of the crime had created a lot of panic for residents, particularly females. It was difficult because there was no resolution.
It left a lot of fear in the community. The police felt pressure to find out who was responsible for Lori's death. I mean, this was a totally innocent mother, 22 years old, taken from her family in a very violent attack.
The people in and around that area where she was killed, they were interested in knowing what was going on. It was tough on our family. It's very frustrating. There's somebody out there that has taken a life, and you want that person to be held accountable.
Anytime there's a crime committed like this, there's that inherent pressure to solve it, to try to bring some closure and some comfort to the family and to the community.
A person that could do something like this, that's not somebody that's going to stop at that one act. Typically speaking, that person is going to continue to hurt other people.
We're always worried that, he can continue to commit these kind of acts until he's brought to justice.
1 month after Lori's murder, police receive a promising new lead.
We received information from a female victim of a man that committed a similar attack against her. The victim was sexually assaulted and strangled, but she was able to get away.
He mistakenly thought she was dead, and she was able to identify him. That person's name was Daryl Kemp. Daryl Kemp at that point was in prison, but he was not in prison at the time that Lori was killed.
And so we started looking into this. We evaluated the information and started to determine if this could potentially be a suspect in this case.
Police dig into Daryl Kemp's background and discover disturbing pattern.
It's determined that Daryl Kemp committed an attack in 1960, similar, where the victim was sexually assaulted and strangled.
He was convicted for the rape and murder of a woman named Marjorie Hipperson in California. He did receive the death penalty for that. But later on, that death penalty got overturned.
Ultimately, he was released and paroled in 1978. That's when Daryl Kemp moved to Austin.
His MO matched. He's killed in this fashion before, and he was in Austin at the time. So this is going to be somebody that detectives look at pretty intently.
Could this be a serial rapist? Could it be a serial murderer? They're questions that we need to get answers to.
1 month after young mother Lori Stout was found raped and murdered in a bathroom stall, police are investigating a tip that she was the victim of convicted serial killer Daryl Kemp.
Detectives at this time were thinking that Daryl Kemp was a strong possibility as a suspect because of the similar MO, which was sexual assault and strangulation.
Investigators learned that although Daryl is currently in jail for an unrelated crime, he was a free man at the time Lori was killed. Detectives head to prison to question him.
The difficult part about interviewing somebody like Daryl Kemp is he's obviously been down this road before. He's got knowledge of how investigations work, and so information may be withheld or may not be genuine in his response based on where he thinks or feels like your questions are leading him.
Detectives start by questioning Daryl about where he was around the time of Lori's murder.
They're asking him questions that would help tie him or connect him to the area that the building was located in. They asked if he knew where this building was, where he lived, basically to try to put him in a geographical area, figure out where he frequented.
Daryl tells investigators he wasn't near the office building where Lori was killed and has no ties to the area.
Daryl Kemp was asked if he was familiar with Lori Stout. He said he wasn't. Things that we're trying to pay attention to is whether his statements are truthful, does his body language support his statement, does it appear he's being deceptive, and is he forthcoming with his answers?
Not trusting the word of a convicted killer, detectives shift gears.
He was asked if he would take a polygraph. He hesitated with that because he didn't trust polygraphs. He is not cooperative at all.
It's the same story when investigators ask him for his fingerprints and a blood sample.
Again, he was very uncooperative.
Based on all the evidence collected, we had enough information to obtain a warrant.
Police collect Daryl's samples and eagerly wait for the results.
When the results of the analysis were returned, it was determined that he was not the suspect in this murder. It's very difficult and frustrating because we're at a stalling point again.
With no other leads, the case once again hits a wall. As the months turn into years, Lori's loved ones struggle with the lack of closure.
Why are we not getting any answers? Give us something. I myself have been lost without her.
Every time October 1st rolls around, first thing I think is, oh, it's Lori's birthday. Anytime when September comes around, when she was taken from us, it's not good.
The suspicion that Lori's husband Gary was the killer continues to linger and causes a deep divide.
My mother's family, even members of his own family, believed that my dad was involved.
We all still had that suspicion that Gary had something to do with it.
Eventually, Gary takes Dale and moves out of state.
Gary, he didn't want to have anything else to do with us. So it was like, oh my God, now we can't see Dale. I lost my sister, but I also lost that connection with my niece.
Being so young, she didn't really remember her mom. So it was probably quite hard on Dale.
When I was growing up, there weren't a whole lot of conversations about my mother. It was just the understanding of she wasn't there anymore.
As Dale grows older, she begins to ask questions.
My dad did not like talking about it. I did not have a family member sit me down and explain to me that this is what had happened to her. It wasn't until I got older, got access to the internet, that's when I learned that she was attacked, that she had been strangled, that she had been raped, and then she had been murdered. It was very overwhelming finding out about it in that way.
Lori's family continues to push for her killer to be brought to justice.
We never gave up hope. We tried to keep it fresh and focused on it. We were constantly checking in.
We had to get this case closed to help give our family a little peace. It was overwhelming.
The pressure finally pays off. And in 1992, nearly 10 years after Lori's murder, a new team of detectives detectives reopen her case.
Now we have new eyes looking at everything. They look at the crime scene photos. They read all the police reports. They look at the various people that were interviewed.
Part of that process is to go back and look at old evidence. Are there things now that are available to law enforcement that weren't previously available? Is there testing that can be done?
Now we're in 1992, so we have DNA testing, which is much more powerful.
With that in mind, investigators revisit their prime suspect, Lori's husband, Gary Stout.
So Gary was contacted again and provided a DNA sample, which was compared to that obtained at the crime scene.
Police are hopeful that they'll finally have the evidence they need to make an arrest. But when the results come back, they are shocked at what they reveal.
It was determined that Gary was not a match. So officially, he could be ruled out as a suspect and remove the cloud of doubt that had been hanging over his head for some period of time.
I do believe that my father felt relief, but it was very difficult for him to talk about.
With Gary cleared, cold case detectives go back over the old files, line by line.
With any review of a case, you look at who's been interviewed, who's been eliminated, and what was discovered is that one of the reports that was provided as far as the blood typing seemed to have an error.
The documentation that was used to analyze the forensic report that excluded a suspect actually showed that there was a clerical error in that lab report. And that particular suspect should have been included as a suspect, not excluded. This is a big turning point in the investigation.
10 years after wife and mother Lori Stout was savagely murdered, cold case detectives have unearthed a stunning error in the results of a blood test. That means a previously cleared suspect might not be innocent after all.
What was discovered is that the report said the subject could be eliminated, but there was a clerical error in the document and it should have read that he could not be eliminated.
This suspect is Robert Van Weesey, the 18-year-old University of Texas student. He was in the building the night Lori was killed, registering for a class, and he's the same person whose prints were found inside the bathroom stall and also on the second floor fire escape door.
Detectives look into what Robert Van Weesey had been doing the last 10 years.
Robert Van Weesey had no criminal history. Here we have this 18-year-old college student coming from a well-to-do family, parents who are professionals, seemed to have a very normal, happy upbringing. He was cooperative. So that all combined with the report that we received, naturally excluded him as a suspect.
Could 18-year-old Robert really have committed such a brutal crime?
In talking with witnesses, Robert Van Weesey is seen about 12:15 a.m. and leaving at about 12:30. They see Lori in the building by herself.
Detectives re-examine the fingerprints he left at the crime scene and notice something troubling.
What they discover is that his story of exiting the building through that second floor fire escape door would naturally support fingerprints being left on the inside of that door if you're pushing it open to leave. But some prints of his are found on the door handle on the exterior of the door as if you're opening it to enter the building.
What this told us is that he had obviously left the building, but he'd also come back in.
He would have been able to re-enter it through that same door if he had propped it open with something.
The discoveries mean investigators need to talk to Robert, but there's a problem.
We try to locate Robert Van Weesey, but we're not able to. We reach out to family members who are cooperative. They provide an attorney's contact. We talk to the attorney who states that Robert Van Weesey is probably somewhere in South America.
All evidence up to that point showed he was in the Austin area, and then he likely finds out that he, once again, is a suspect, and now we have DNA testing capability, so he flees.
Fearing Robert has left the country, detectives scramble to find him. They interview dozens of his friends and family members, but no one is willing to cooperate. Before they can launch an all-out search, detectives still need more proof that Robert's the killer. So they come up with a plan to obtain his DNA.
With Robert Van Weesey having fled, we cannot get a sample from him, but what we are able to do is get what's called YSTR testing accomplished. And that's familial DNA, and it's specific to the Y chromosome that all brothers and fathers would share. So since Robert Van Weesey has brothers in the area, that's something we can actually test.
In order to obtain the sample, detectives conducted surveillance with family members, and at one point they observed one of the brothers discard trash and retrieve it.
Trash is not something you need to get a search warrant for because it's what's deemed abandoned. So detectives take specific items that would gather DNA evidence, like razor blades and toothpicks, and they conduct YSTR testing.
When the DNA tests come back, the results are conclusive.
And lo and behold, it's a match.
Finally, we're able to make a direct connection with Robert Van Wiese to the DNA found at the crime scene. It was surprising to know that a young male coming from the background that he did had the ability to do this at such a young age.
There were no red flags with him. And so it was very unexpected to see him as the actual killer.
We finally had a name. I just totally broke down. And so you're trying to wrap your head around how can an 18-year-old do something like this?
It was shocking because I was 18 myself at the time. I would have never have had that cross my mind. I said, okay, where is he at? Can we get him? And then that's when we learned that he was gone.
Robert Van Wiese is charged with murder and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, and a warrant is issued for his arrest. Investigators team up with the FBI and launch an international manhunt.
The Van Wiese family owned a lot of properties throughout Mexico. We conducted telephone toll analysis. We looked at financial records. We monitored travel of Van Wiese's family. We did a tremendous amount of ground surveillance on locations where we thought he might be. There were some tips that the FBI received for sightings of Van Wiese in Mexico in certain locations, but we weren't successful in locating him.
Years pass with no sign of Robert, but detectives refuse to quit.
All you want to do is bring the guy back so he can face justice and get some kind of closure for the victims. But even the FBI, we have limited access, limited resources, and Mexico's a big country. There's plenty of places for him to hide.
It is very frustrating because for me, I've lived my entire life waiting for justice, but also very cognizant of the fact that it may never happen.
Then, in 2016, the hunt for Robert Van Wiese takes a promising turn.
Wiese had been on the run for 20 years, so I knew it was going to have to be something big for us to find him. And so we discussed it, and we said, let's do it. Let's go for it.
On December 13th, 2016, the FBI places Robert Van Wiese on their top 10 most wanted list.
This was huge for our case because it brings awareness, but also that comes with a $100,000 reward. So it was exciting to know that we're making traction.
Once we announced his addition to the FBI's 10 most wanted list, we again interviewed people that knew him and possibly knew where he was. Probably the most important interview was with Van Wiese's mother. We said, Robert is going to be arrested. He is coming home. The safest way is to turn himself in. I think the mother realized with the $100,000 reward, his name on the 10 most wanted list, that it was going to be insurmountable that he was going to get arrested.
The pressure pays off, and a phone call comes in that changes everything.
Robert Van Wiese's attorney contacted the district attorney's office to let them know that he wants to turn himself in.
33 years after the murder of Lori Stout, her elusive killer, Robert Van Wiese, is ready to return to the U.S. to face justice.
Robert Van Wiese's lawyer contacted the district attorney's office and started to inquire about possible surrender with a plea bargain agreement. Typically speaking, when someone is a fugitive, we do not negotiate, but circumstances in this situation are quite unique. Mexico will not agree to extradite to Texas if the death penalty is on the table. So we will not get him in our hands if he's arrested in Mexico unless we agree to not have death penalty on the table.
Wanting a swift resolution, the district attorney negotiates a deal.
Van Wiese would agree to turn himself in, and they agreed to 30 years in prison.
On January 26, 2017, police head to the Mexican border to meet Robert.
The plan was for him to surrender, but we were holding our breath. We weren't sure it was going to happen.
We're anxious that this is finally going to take place, but until we have Robert Van Wiese in physical custody, we can't let our guard down.
The arrangement was that he would meet us at the halfway point on the pedestrian bridge. There's a line in the middle. On one side says Mexico, on the other side says United States. He was to meet us there at 1 o'clock. He didn't show up.
As the minutes tick by, investigators start to worry they've been duped.
We had assurances from the attorney that he would show up, but at any point during that time, he could have turned around and changed his mind, and there was nothing we could have done.
At 1:36 p.m., a lone figure approaches the border.
He walked up very slowly, stopped at the line. He introduced himself as Robert Van Weesey, and I said to him, "You ready to turn yourself in?" He took a deep breath. He closed his eyes. He said, "Yes." I said, "Step on across." And he took one step over and he was arrested.
Seeing him walk across that bridge and seeing law enforcement put handcuffs on him, it was extremely satisfying.
There'd been so much work from so many different people over the years that from 1983 up until 2017, now we have somebody that's accountable and be brought to justice, was one of the most rewarding experiences in my career.
I sent the picture to Dale and let her know we got him. And I get a text back that it apparently was Dale's birthday. So it's pretty emotional.
She showed me a photo of Van Weesey being escorted into custody. It's kind of hard to believe that after all of these years that it would be that day of all days that he would turn himself in.
It was, and it still is surreal that it finally did happen. I mean, it just emotions everywhere. I just can't, it's finally over. It's finally over. Finally over.
The plea deal means Robert does not have to speak to investigators, leaving them to piece together how they believe the murder unfolded.
He showed up that night to register for classes. He sees Lori as she's cleaning. It's possible that Robert Van Weesey and Lori Stout had an interaction as he passed her. Maybe she spoke to him. He goes to the bathroom, develops his plan on coming back in.
He's opportunistic, and the opportunity rose, and he left through that fire escape door on the second floor, propped it open.
And once the other workers had all left, I think he came back in.
When he came back in, he would have passed in the parking lot the dumpster that had some leftover electrical wiring that Gary Stout had used that day for the hot water heater, and grabbed it and went upstairs and then attacked her, raped her, and killed her. Lori was killed in probably one of the most personal, violent ways that someone can be killed. Robert Van Weesey is an extremely cold and calculating person.
On March 28, 2017, Robert pleads guilty to Lori's murder and is sentenced to 30 years in prison. Lori's sister, Beverly, is there to deliver an emotional impact statement.
I looked him right in the eye and told him what he had taken from our family and what he had done. And, I just told him I hope he rots in hell and gets to feel some of that terror that my sister felt that night. I know in my heart he is where he needs to be.
I think Lori's family felt a sense of relief, a sense of closure that maybe now, at least my hope for them now with that is that they could at least start to heal.
Him being arrested and incarcerated does bring closure. I think that that's what everybody dreams about when a crime like this happens to one of their family members.
Still see Lori's face quite often. She was a hoot. Lori was a hoot.
When 37-year-old Crystal McDowell vanishes from Baytown, Texas,
everybody's looking for her.
Investigators question whether Hurricane Harvey has claimed her as one of its victims.
It's raining pretty heavy at times. The storm was affecting the Texas coast.
It wasn't just that Crystal was missing. People were dying everywhere. People were losing their homes, their cars. They were flooded out.
But when revelations about her recent divorce come to light,
Steve was exhibiting some pretty dangerous behavior. Threatening.
investigations lead towards a darker possibility.
And she did not realize the danger she was putting herself in.
He would threaten to kill the kids. He would threaten to kill himself. He would threaten to kill her.
Has Crystal's life been taken by her husband? Detectives gather evidence until a picture of a suspect emerges. Which piece of the puzzle will reveal who is guilty of murder? What would be a killer's mistake? At 7 a.m. on August 25th, 2017, CCTV captures 37-year-old Crystal McDowell heading to collect her children.
Crystal was last seen leaving her boyfriend's house in the morning.
Most everybody was in hurricane preparation mode.
Before she left, basically, the roads were not flooded.
Authorities are preparing for Hurricane Harvey soon hitting the Gulf Coast, including Crystal's home in Baytown.
A number of people had already evacuated to Dallas or Austin, different places, San Antonio, trying to get away from the coast. And so when all of this started taking place, we started getting a lot of rain, just because we were on what they called the dirty side or the wet side of the storm. So we'd gotten a lot of rain.
Crystal had said she was going to collect her children, but she's never seen Jane.
August 26th. Crystal's been missing for a day. Her friends, her family, no one has heard from her. She's not responding to text messages. She's not responding to phone calls. People are getting really worried. Crystal's uncle calls police to report Crystal missing. But keep in mind, at this point in time, Hurricane Harvey is bearing down heavy.
Crystal's Aunt Cindy is increasingly concerned.
You go from, oh my gosh, it's been too long, she would never not return your messages, but, I had called her several times and texted her and said, hey babe, where you at? Everybody's looking for you. And I knew that when she did not text me back, within an hour or so, there was something wrong, and that's when I started to get worried.
She was reported missing by family members.
Sheriff Brian Hawthorne's team is handed the case of the missing Crystal McDowell just as Hurricane Harvey makes landfall.
So while all this is taking place, dealing with a missing persons case, at the same time we're trying to do everything we can to help our citizens, whether it's evacuate them from their homes using airboats or our high water vehicles, also trying to secure their homes.
During the investigation of a missing person, there's usually a lot of people involved. People are looking, searching for this particular person. However, when there's a hurricane that's actively going on, it's chaotic.
That particular area, county, got somewhere in between 55 and 60 inches of rain over, about a 72 to 48 hour period.
A lot of resources are devoted to saving the lives of the people affected by the hurricane. Emergency services are stretched very thin.
As the days went on, the bayous and the rivers continued to rise, and so we were losing more and more subdivisions to rising water.
So manpower and the personnel used to search for someone is being depleted in other areas.
Because of the storm, that report of that missing person may not have really gotten into a detective's hands for a few days, but we immediately started working on the case the same day that she was reported. And thank goodness for the deputies and the detectives that took the initial report. They were very spot on about how they handled their business, and they crossed their T's and dotted their I's very well. I've always said the detective that makes the first call can really have a tendency to set the tone to help the investigators down the road.
Detectives begin the search by trying to confirm Crystal's last movements, the place she was due to collect her 2 children from before being reported missing. It's the home of her ex-husband, 44-year-old Stephen McDowell.
About 7 in the morning, Crystal texts Steve and said she was on her way there and asked if he had water because she may have to stay.
1 minute after 7, she sends a text message to Steve saying, on my way to pick up the kids.
McDowell tells detectives Crystal just didn't show up.
Now, this was early in the morning, just as Hurricane Harvey began to make landfall in Texas.
Probing Crystal's movements before the hurricane, detectives zero in on the dynamics of her relationship with her ex.
Well, I think Crystal was very much a pleaser, right? And I think she wanted the kids to grow up in as a normal relationship as could be. She was having her townhome renovated. He had asked her to just stay with him, that he would move out of the master bedroom. She could have the master bedroom if she would just stay at the house with him and the kids, which she did.
To do this separation in the best way possible, that would incur the least cost to both Stephen and their child together.
It becomes clear that Stephen and Crystal's relationship has always had its own unique dynamic.
His role in the marriage was to help take care of the children because she had 2 jobs.
He was very much into his kids. He spent a lot of time with his children. And in a lot of ways, he probably spent more time with the children than Crystal did.
Could McDowell know more than he's saying? The couple's relationship becomes pivotal to the police investigation. Detectives hear how Crystal met McDowell in her mid-20s.
He was a supervisor at one of those warehouses that services the chemical factories, particularly dealing with ethylene and plastics. He was a shipping supervisor.
She had told me she had met Steve and that he was very sweet and caring and that he meant a lot to her and things may be going forward with their relationship. And I asked her basically if she thought she was in love with him, and she said, "Yes, ma'am, Aunt Cindy, I think I am." He was nice. He was very laid back. You know, she was always wild and fun and eccentric and lived life on the edge, and he always kind of let her take the front seat of everything. And I thought that was a good pair because, you know, as much as she traveled, as much as she, you know, had friends and wanted to go, he just kind of went along. I liked him. I just thought, you know, she had found her soulmate for life.
McDowell offers Crystal a shot at stability.
She did have a rough childhood. Both of her parents died early in life, and during her childhood. They tell me that both of them were very recreational, potentially addicted to drugs. She was moved around and raised by a number of different people in the family. You know, fortunately for her, the family did pick up the pieces the best they could, and she was provided for by more than one person.
Crystal is my niece by marriage. She was loved by everyone. She never let anything get her down. She was always fun and rambunctious. Yeah, she was very well taken care of by her grandparents. In spite of all the bad things that had happened, she kind of found her happy place at her grandparents.
Later on, Crystal discovers a love for travel. Indeed, she found a career to match her passion for seeing new places.
I've never found a person that did not like her. Ultimately, I think that's the reason she was successful as a flight attendant, because she was very forward and friendly and had the ability to draw people into her.
She partied like young people. They went to the clubs, they went dancing, friend's house, spent time with her friends. Her family was very important. Her friends were almost like family. Like, she loved everybody as they were her family, so she basically just hung out and enjoyed her 20s.
It's during the flight attendant years that Crystal meets McDowell. They wed in 2017. But their earlier chemistry seems to disappear when they're married.
She basically, within the first year, noticed there was just a lot of signs that it just was not going to work. There was just a lot of situations that she's seen going south that she was getting concerned about. I think she just knew that they weren't compatible. He was very emotional, very needy. They started arguing a lot. Basically just growing pains of marriage, but he was so emotional that he would, you know, throw out threats.
So she decides it's time to file for divorce.
McDowell doesn't take Crystal's request for divorce well. They'd only been married 1 year.
Stephen is somebody who doesn't take no for an answer. And even as Crystal grew distant, even as Crystal grew discontent, and no doubt talked to him about how unhappy she was and how she'd like to probably try to separate from him, he just kept coming up with reason after reason for why they had to stay together.
Friends and family say that he was extremely emotionally manipulative. They stayed together for several years after.
They continue trying to make the marriage work. The two have 2 children together.
In 2008, McDowell and Crystal welcome a baby boy, and 2 years later, a baby girl.
He and his son were very much into gaming. They would do a lot of video games together, competing against each other and playing video games.
She was mainly staying for the children. She loved Steve as a person. She respected him as far as a dad was concerned. She never spoke ill of him. She just kind of fell out of love with him. They just kind of grew apart.
With Crystal still missing, a picture is emerging of an unhappy marriage, with Crystal coerced to staying with her husband. He has become, for investigators, suspect number 1, a man who might well know why she's disappeared.
She would say she was going to leave, but then he would threaten to kill the kids. He would threaten to kill himself. He would threaten to kill her. I mean, basically, she was torn between the whole events. I mean, she was worried about her children. She was worried about herself.
The investigation uncovers a chilling revelation. McDowell has threatened to kill his own children multiple times whenever Crystal has threatened to leave him.
She was worried about herself. She was worried about the family. She was worried about the impact of, of what it was going to do to the kids and what he would say to the kids.
And that's what makes it very difficult, is trying to determine what is an idle threat and what isn't an idle threat.
I think she thought of every scenario, and every time the scenarios would go back to, I only have one option. That's to stay with him and to make it work and to raise my children.
Especially during emotional times. It's very common for husbands and wives to say things to the other person just to hurt them emotionally, but not necessarily with the intent to physically harm them.
Video footage uncovered by investigators, however, paints a more complex picture of McDowell and Crystal's relationship. In 2012, he surprises Crystal with a skydiving experience.
Happy birthday to you! Happy birthday to you! Happy birthday, dear Crystal! Happy birthday to you!
By this point, Crystal has become the main money earner in the family.
She had 2 jobs. She was a real estate agent and she was flying. She was an amazing realtor. Everyone loved her. She reached out to so many people, and her whole motto is that she just wanted to be a blessing to someone.
She really is the breadwinner for this family. She is really supporting the whole family.
Despite best efforts to make the marriage work, the differences between McDowell and Crystal are too great. By 2017, Crystal has had enough. If she is not simply missing, but instead has been murdered, a clear motive has emerged. One which puts her husband as potential killer.
In June of 2017, the divorce was finally final. Everyone talked about how Steve was distraught because it was actually over. When a divorce is being finalized, or during the period of time the divorce is going through, it's a very dangerous time, because the desperate person that doesn't want to let go is at a point where they may try or do anything.
Once that divorce happened, that was the line he drew, that this means that things are over, that this means that I've failed at my marriage. And so I think he was happy to keep the pretenses up as long as Crystal wasn't divorced on paper. I think he knew that they didn't have much of a relationship, but the hard line he drew was when they finally divorced.
McDowell, angered by the finalization of the divorce, falls back into his old habits of making threats, lashing out. Discovering that is huge in the inquiry for detectives.
A few weeks after the divorce, Crystal called 911.
Steve threatened to kill himself and the children. And on a prior occasion, Crystal actually called police when the children didn't show up for school. And she found them with Steve, and Steve was threatening to harm himself and the children.
Later that day, he returned the children to her, and any charges or other charges were dropped.
I think Crystal was starting to see that perhaps Stephen was quite erratic, and that perhaps maybe his distress was morphing him into a person she did not recognize, and she probably started to push back a little bit and try to maintain her distance a bit, because she probably seen some signs that he was becoming increasingly unstable.
McDowell's history of threats and volatile behavior cements him as a person of interest in Crystal's disappearance. But he's not the only person police consider.
The fact that Steve had made a threat and that law enforcement had gotten involved in it obviously was one of those check marks that fills the box that makes him, a person of interest. But that's not to say that every time that happens, it automatically makes somebody a suspect, because you do see those kinds of actions are pretty common in marital separations or child custody issues. But we also had other people of interest too.
This is not a straightforward investigation. Evidence emerges of an attempt to keep things amicable for the sake of the couple's children. It seems to detectives that the couple get along too well for the disappearance of Crystal to be a certain case of spousal murder.
She was renovating her townhome. It was a townhome that they had owned together, and she got it in the divorce. And she actually helped Steve secure the home that he had. So she was part of him getting that home, and then ultimately he had room for the kids.
Crystal buys a home for McDowell and their 2 children, just a 12-minute drive from Baytown.
Crystal bought a home in Mont Bellevue is because it is a very good school district, but Mont Bellevue still has the warm and cozy kind of country feel, know your neighbor type feel. The whole idea was to get into the school district, get them set up into the home.
While Crystal's new place across town needs renovating, McDowell and the children settle into life in the new suburb. She arranges to stay with them. Again, not the picture expected of a spousal murder case. At times, it seemed that the couple were amicably separated.
Crystal thought, I'll just stay there and that'll give me the opportunity to spend some time with the kids, and then that way when I am home I can help get them to school and, get them breakfast. She wanted to be a part of their life.
It was going to make the kids happy. She was going to see the kids more often, but she also had a built-in babysitter with Steve.
I would tell her, I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think you need to stay there. Basically, he's not in a position where he is willing to accept you as a friend. He's thinking that, you're putting this out there and that you're going to stay, and that wasn't the case. And she made it perfectly clear over and over again. I care about you. I'm not in love with you. I'm here for the children.
Crystal moving back into the house was just a manipulative scenario that put Steve thinking that he had an opportunity to re-engage his relationship with her, when in fact she had no intentions, and she just did not realize the danger she was putting herself in.
Had Crystal's return been taken as a signal by Stephen McDowell that there was still a couple?
I think it just shows how removed Stephen had been from reality, that perhaps in his mind he had told himself a different narrative about what was going on with Crystal, that ultimately she was still his to win back. And it shows just how dangerous he could become.
Even though they were technically divorced, I think her just staying there, playing house, even though they were sleeping in different beds, one was upstairs, one was downstairs, it got to be where he would start following her too much or calling her too much. He would want to bring her dinner in the salon, or, he started stalking her at one point. At the real estate business, he'd put trackers on her car. He was accusing her of different things that was going on at work.
McDowell could not have been more wrong thinking there was a future for him with Crystal. During the time they are cohabiting and co-parenting, another man has entered Crystal's life.
She's met the local jeweler. She tells all her friends, and she goes on Facebook and she says, I've never been happier in my life.
They were only together about a month before this happened, but I think, she was ready to start dating and getting out there and, enjoying life.
Detectives now have a new line of inquiry to consider. Was Crystal's disappearance down to former husband Stephen McDowell, or should they consider the new man in her life? They talk to a family relative.
I'm at a jeweler. He's really going out here. Gotta be just nice to be out waiting. Blah, blah, blah. And he's breathing out. I'm really bad. What about anyway? Don't know. She's lying. She loved it, but she's like your woman.
When a relative mentions feeling unsettled by Crystal's new boyfriend, detectives interview him.
Great conversation. Really concerned about the location of about the camp and finding out. Here's one time. We have a very strong connection.
Crystal's new relationship had progressed rapidly. Within weeks of their first date, she invites him on a family holiday. It means taking McDowell's place.
The family was going on a family cruise. Kids and everybody. And Steve was going to be a part of it. In fact, it's believed by us from an investigator's perspective and things that Steve has told us, that Steve intended on hoping to get remarried to Crystal on the cruise. And so, as the relationship with her new boyfriend was developing, she then realized she did not want to go on the cruise with Steve, and ultimately she wanted to go with her new boyfriend, not her ex-husband.
To those around Crystal, it was clear she didn't want Stephen, and Stephen just wasn't getting the message. He'd even planned that the couple renew their vows on the cruise.
And I think he just had thought so much stuff up in his mind about renewing their vows and just falling back in love. I think he basically just, I would say kind of delusional about it.
I think Stephen had a very rich fantasy life in his head for a very long time. From the time when their marriage was truly not happy, but he was still pretending that there was a marriage there to salvage in the first place, to wanting to propose to Crystal on this cruise.
I think she wanted Steve to go so she would have a built-in babysitter on the cruise ship with the children, so she could enjoy her family and enjoy other people on the cruise. We don't believe, from a sheriff's office perspective, anything that the investigators found, that she was interested romantically with Steve.
At some point, she realized or thought that this may be a bad idea and uninvited Steve.
So she has to break the news to Steve that he won't be going on the cruise this time, that she's going to be taking her boyfriend.
You know, she was divorced.
Steve was devastated about being uninvited.
Could rejection be a trigger for murder? On August 24th, Crystal tells McDowell that her new relationship is blossoming.
She had come home to Steve's house, which was her home at the time, where she was staying, and he felt like she was going to stay there with him all evening. They were going to, do the whole hurricane thing as a family. They were going to shelter in place there at their home. He was out in the backyard playing with the kids. She went in and took a shower and got dressed, and prior to her leaving, he comes in the house and he finds her dressed to the nines to go out with her new boyfriend. He thought it was going to be a Steve and Crystal and the kids' evening. Instead, she left. They drove down to Clear Lake. It's a little community town south of Houston. There's a very large mall there, a nice restaurant. The storm was affecting the Texas coast.
Because Hurricane Harvey is getting stronger, Crystal decides that she'll stay the night at her new boyfriend's place.
And I think that also definitely frustrated Steve.
It's the following morning that Crystal is seen on security cameras leaving her boyfriend's house and heading back to McDowell's.
She was very smart. She wouldn't have drove her car through high water, or she wouldn't have done anything that basically would have jeopardized her or her children.
It went ashore, stalled, and then it started moving back to the east. And then once it moved back to the east, then that's when we started having the winds and the heavy rains.
It's as Aunt Cindy braces her home for the approaching hurricane that a text from her son suddenly arrives.
He was burning my phone up, and finally I answered it, and he just told me, he said, "Mom, did you know that Crystal was missing?" And I'm like, I kind of really chuckled at first. I'm like, "Crystal is not missing, son." He said, "Yes, Mom, she's missing. Like, nobody can find her." I said, "Clinton, Crystal didn't run off. She's not missing. She probably flew to Belize or somewhere to escape the storm. She's not missing." And he goes, "Mom, everybody's looking for her."
Family members soon suspect something other than the hurricane is to blame for Crystal's disappearance.
They told us that we needed to be looking at Steve.
I believe he left her to the point of no return.
McDowell's history of threats and growing family suspicions place him back squarely in the spotlight as the prime suspect. Crystal's new boyfriend is clearly an entirely innocent party.
Well, there's no doubt that Steve is a type of person that can be very manipulative.
Steve will tell police initially that Crystal never showed up. He doesn't know where she is.
He was just saying he don't know what happened to her. She just never come in. She had sent some texts and said she was going to come get the kids, and then she never showed up, and he was sticking to it.
A digital footprint reveals that McDowell tells different people different things about what has happened to Crystal. He shows a text to a male relative.
Stephen showed him another text from Crystal at about 9:30 in the morning that said, "I'm going to pick up the children and take them to Dallas." No one that knew Crystal believed that this was a text from her, because it's not something that she would do in the middle of a hurricane. Go pick up her children and take them to Dallas.
Aunt Cindy decides to stay close to McDowell to ensure the children are safe. While with him, he tells her that others are also making claims about Crystal's whereabouts.
While I was there, he had several phone calls that people called and threatened to kill her if he didn't put so much money up, like they were extorting him. I was there when somebody had called and basically had called and said that if you don't send me $4,000, I'm going to kill her. Well, then he started cussing and hanging up the phone, and I'm like, what is going on? Like, what are you talking about? And he says basically that, people were calling him and threatening him for money and basically saying they had her, tied to a chair and they were torturing her, and that, if he didn't have X amount of dollars within a certain amount of time that, they were going to kill her.
They were wild allegations being made just as Crystal had disappeared. McDowell's behavior was now baffling. He appeared at times to be evasive and at other times to want help.
Steve was very willing to talk to us. Steve never one time ever stopped us, denied us anything. Everything from downloading the electronic system in his car. There was all kinds of different things that we did from a forensic value that he could have stopped us where we would have had to have gotten a search warrant. Instead, he was more than willing to sign and give consent for us to continue to investigate and dig into some of his issues that could have been protected if he'd have chosen to.
McDowell's erratic behavior, hoax calls, the involvement of other persons of interest, all makes the detective work challenging, as does Hurricane Harvey.
Normally, the search would be on in full force, but right now, Hurricane Harvey is hammering down on the region. Entire cities are just swallowed up in floodwaters, and the rain won't stop. It continues, so the waters are rising, and homes are underwater, and entire neighborhoods are flooded. And the police are doing everything they can, but a lot of these deputies and these police officers, their homes are underwater. They can't get to scenes because there's no way to get there. So a normal investigation can't happen right now. It's impossible. But police are doing everything they can to try to fit the pieces together.
Unable to search on foot for the still missing Crystal, detectives turned to local businesses, scouring surveillance footage for clues. On August 29th, a friend of Crystal McDowell calls detectives with vital information.
3 days after she's been reported missing, Crystal's car is found. A friend sees her Mercedes parked outside of a Motel 6 in Baytown. Police get to the scene, but it's odd because Crystal's car is parked outside this motel and the doors are unlocked and the keys are inside the car on the console. This is really strange. They can't even get the car out because the waters are still rising and the car is submerged, so they have to have it towed out. Now, they submit the evidence to the FBI's forensic lab, but with everything flooded, you can imagine, everything is slowed down. So this is, you can imagine trying to run through floodwaters. That's kind of the way this investigation is going. Nothing is moving quickly. Everything is just a slog trying to get this piece put together.
As they await forensic results from Crystal's car, police scour video surveillance in the area and zoom in on a face that they recognize.
There's more security footage that surfaces from a local gas station. Steve is seen dumping something into a trash can at this local gas station and leaving. Now, you would normally think, well, the investigators are going to search to see what the contents are of that trash can, but everything is underwater. Everything is washing away.
They were not able to find out what those contents were because that garbage can had been swept away by floodwaters.
2 weeks into the investigation, as Hurricane Harvey clears, crucial evidence emerges.
The evidence just continued to keep mounting, and most of it was video surveillance from business security cameras. Whether it was the service station where we later found her car at a Motel 6 parking lot, and the gas station caught somebody parking the car, right? And that person that got out of the car resembled Steve.
More surveillance footage reveals Stephen riding a bike away from the motel where he has parked Crystal's car.
There was an interstate highway and a state highway where this Motel 6 was. And directly catty corner of that was a Walmart. And we were able to get video surveillance of Steve buying a bicycle and an energy drink and a pack of cigarettes at very early in the morning, like 5:45, 6 a.m., very, very early. And then we got additional security video surveillance of him riding that bike down the Interstate 10 service road towards his house. It wasn't until we started putting all the video when we discovered the car, then the video of the car being parked, and then the video of him buying the bicycle, and then the video of him riding the bicycle home. Obviously, we went back and did another search of the house and in the garage, and there was the bicycle, and we were able to identify that was the bicycle that he had purchased from the Walmart shortly after parking the car in the Motel 6 parking lot.
Suspicious movements staged to make it appear as though Crystal parked her own car, caught on surveillance video. Could this be a killer's mistake? The evidence to convict Stephen McDowell.
I would say it was very unusual to be riding your bike home in the rain, and it really wasn't on an adult bicycle either. It was a kid's bicycle.
On September the 9th, 2017, McDowell is brought in for further questioning.
And so ultimately, after multiple days of interviewing and multiple days of him coming back to the sheriff's office and being interviewed in our interview room, he ultimately broke down and told us that he would take us to the body.
Confronted by police's extensive video evidence, McDowell starts to unravel.
He finally confesses to police. He tells police that he strangled Crystal, and then he covered her face with plastic. He tied up her hands. He stuffed her body into a plastic bag, and he dumped her into a wooded area. He agrees to take them to the location where he dumped Crystal's body. It's a heavily wooded area near Needle Point Road. Police admit that without Steve's cooperation, they may never have found Crystal.
It's in my personal belief that we would not have located it if Steve hadn't taken us to it. When we finally were able to recover the body had a lot of decomposition, and there had also been some wild animal activity. All right, so very difficult to identify exactly how she died.
Believing police can't pinpoint how he killed her, McDowell adjusts his account of what has happened to Crystal.
He tried to say he squeezed her to death, as in hugging her, but we don't by any means believe that.
But he's saying it was all in just this heat of the moment passion, and I didn't intend to kill her. And in Texas, under the law, a heat of the moment sort of killing could get a defendant as little as 2 years. So that's his hope.
On June the 5th, 2019, McDowell faces court in Galveston County, accused of murdering Crystal. Her Aunt Cindy takes the stand.
We were subpoenaed, sitting outside because we weren't allowed to go in. And I want to say, just seeing the bicycle roll up, seeing the dentist come in, those kind of things were like a punch in the stomach. It made it real for me. That was probably when I knew that this was a real thing. Like, there was more details. I mean, I think when you're going through the emotion of it, you know, you've got a death, you've got the murder, you've got the kid, you're overwhelmed.
McDowell pleads not guilty, forcing Crystal's family to endure the ordeal of a trial, but he doesn't anticipate the prosecution's star witness.
And that the daughter said that she saw, her father saw Steve strangling Crystal. So I just have to assume that everything that we have discussed as a prosecuting team and with the Texas Rangers and my detectives, that she obviously walked in and saw Steve strangling Crystal.
A crushing blow for McDowell. His young daughter testifies in a way which might convince a jury he intended to kill her mother.
We had initially heard that the children were both asleep upstairs when Steve killed Crystal. This little girl testifies that she actually woke up while her mommy and daddy were arguing. She'd gotten up to go to the bathroom. She heard her mommy and daddy arguing, she said. She said they were fighting about the marriage breaking up. She said they were fighting because daddy was mad because mommy was going out with this new guy.
His daughter's testimony significantly undermines McDowell's defense.
It takes 4 minutes to smother someone. I mean, at some point you would think he would have snapped and realized, what am I doing? My child's watching and my wife's dying, but of course I wasn't in his mind.
There is no heat of the moment here for Stephen. I think this is something that he contemplated for a while. I think he probably abides by the adage of, if I can't have her, no one can. There's maybe a bit of that possessiveness in there. And of course, him being out of touch with reality. And I think when he realized that the relationship was truly coming to an end and that his fantasy life could no longer make sense of what was actually happening, this was going to be the natural step he would take.
By June 12, 2019, the jury has heard the evidence. Do they believe Crystal McDowell's death was a tragic accident or murder?
But the jury isn't buying that. They've heard too much, they've seen too much. They know about his previous threats to kill the children and himself. Stephen McDowell is convicted of murder in the death of his ex-wife, Crystal. He's sentenced to 50 years in prison. The earliest he could be paroled is the year 2042.
He destroyed his children's life. I mean, he destroyed Crystal and, her dreams and her goals and her visions of, her family, and the kids will grow up without a mom. But at the end of the day, I guess the most part of my feelings go for pity. I feel bad for him that he made that choice.
Stephen McDowell was wrong to believe he could murder his ex-wife in front of his children and use a hurricane as cover.
When we were able to capture him on video, in the early morning hours, buying a bicycle, and it was very in conjunction with the time of the car was being parked, because it didn't take too long just to get an idea of how long it takes to walk from the parking lot. Those were the pieces of the puzzle that we needed.
Displaying a pattern of controlling violent behavior, being seen by his own children strangling their mother, and failing to account for surveillance cameras which proved his wife's life had not been claimed by a hurricane, had proved to be a killer's mistake.
Orange County, November 1999. A security guard discovers a parked car on the Ortega Highway.
He was going to check on a gate when he came across the car that was still running.
Inside are the bodies of Ken and Carolyn Stahl, two medical doctors from nearby Huntington Beach.
They were shot multiple times. They never had a chance. It was just really a mystery about what had happened.
It was alarming to the citizens of Orange County. There was a lot of speculation as to what may have occurred.
Police are baffled by the senseless killings, but their investigation soon uncovers a bizarre and deadly love triangle.
I've never had another case like it. She got to the point where she set this thing in motion and ultimately followed through with the plan.
Lying in wait, preparation, full intent to kill. That is the definition of murder.
This is the story of the cold-blooded murder of Ken and Carolyn Stahl, a jealous lover and a killer for hire. Orange County in Southern California covers the area from Los Angeles down to San Diego.
Orange County is a big county. It's one of the largest counties in California, and it's a diverse county. It's got beautiful beaches. There's a lot of wealth.
Most of the houses are rich people, mostly down by the coast, which is Newport Beach, Laguna Beach, San Juan Capistrano. Then you go north and you go up into Huntington Beach, and then you go into LA County.
For a long time, it was agricultural, so it was kind of catching up. We did have murders and we did have violent crimes, but not to the extent that a lot of the other surrounding areas did.
On Friday the 20th of November 1999, a security guard traveling along the Ortega Highway notices a parked car with the engine still running and the lights on.
The area was about 8 miles east of San Juan, and the car was parked in an emergency turnout right next to an emergency call box that people used to call when they have car trouble.
The security guard pulls up to the car. Silver sedan. The car is running. The headlights are on. But there's some broken glass on the ground on the driver's side. And the security guard now is suspicious and wants to know what's going on. So he walks up to this car. It's very dark, only illuminated by his headlights and his flashlight.
The passenger door was open. He could see the legs of a woman sticking out of the passenger side. And as he approached the driver's side, he saw a man with blood all over his head, slumped forward with his head on the steering wheel.
The security guard calls 911 from the nearby call box, and first responders soon arrive on the scene to assess the situation.
At that particular time, what they do is they end up contacting CHP, California Highway Patrol, because we need to secure the area. So they cordon it off. They shut the Ortega Highway off because now we have a crime scene.
They are trained to take a look at these scenes, to first of all check for signs of life, while not disturbing what appears to be a crime scene where there's going to have to be full-scale investigation.
I got a call from my unit sergeant at home. It was in the middle of the night. I got up and went directly to the crime scene in my personal car and met my partner there. It was probably 1 o'clock in the morning when I got there.
Investigators carefully examined the crime scene for evidence as they tried to piece together the tragic sequence of events leading to the shooting.
They're trying to reconstruct what happened. They are looking for evidence, they're looking for clues, signs of injuries on the body, other things that can tell them what transpired.
This was a rather wealthy aristocratic couple. They found driver's licenses for both of them, and they were immediately able to identify who they were.
They both had California driver's licenses. His was in a wallet in his pocket. Hers was in a wallet in her purse.
The occupants of the car are identified as 57-year-old Kenneth Stahl and his wife, 44-year-old Carolyn.
Ken Stahl was sitting in the driver's seat. He was still wearing his seatbelt. Didn't look like he'd ever attempted to get out of the car. He had been shot once on the bridge of the nose, and then he was shot again in the torso and the chest.
We recovered 6 bullets from the scene and from their bodies, and then with our forensic scientists was able to match those as 357 or 38.
There was one found on the driver's side, one was found in her jacket, and then one was found on the passenger side. They noticed that on his elbow, his triceps, and in his eye, there were bullet wounds. They believe the one from the eye came from the back of the head and came out his eye.
On the other side of the car, Carolyn Stahl was laying across the passenger seat with her head near the console and her feet toward the door, face down.
She seemed to be shot about 10 times all over her body. It was torso, her arm, her leg.
The passenger door was open. The back of the car had blood smears on it that were probably from her, we figured, and her shoe was laying on the side of the roadway near the rear of the car.
They find the blood drops behind the car, and she at some point during all of this shooting got out of the car, dripped blood, lost her shoe, and then got back in the car.
It was a very unusual situation. 2 bodies on this remote road, no signs of robbery.
They had money, her jewelry was there. The only thing that was missing was a stone from one of her rings, so we didn't think it was a robbery because nothing appeared to have been taken.
Police canvass the nearby area and appeal for witnesses to come forward to assist them in their investigation.
There's an overnight campground there at Casper's Park. So that evening, we sent a couple of detectives over to the campground, and they actually woke everybody up that was spending the night in the campground and interviewed everyone in the campground. No one there had seen or heard anything.
There was a woman that had called and said she was traveling the opposite way on the Ortega Highway and said she saw a small white 4-door vehicle traveling the opposite way. And she thought it was kind of strange, but she reported it. So we had that, but she didn't have any license plate or anything like that. How many white 4-door little cars are in Orange County?
The other witness that we had was a security officer from the Mission Viejo company. He didn't see anything other than the car parked on the side of the road, so he didn't have much to add at that point.
The post-mortem examinations of Ken and Carolyn were to later reveal even more horrific details of their final moments.
After a person is murdered, the body becomes essentially evidence. The body speaks to the investigators. What these bodies tell investigators is that they were executed.
Based on the autopsy, our time of death for them was between 8:30 and 10:30. We identified the weapon as a .357 or .38 caliber revolver. They're usually 6-shot revolvers, not 8. So we believe that the shooter reloaded, then walked up behind Carolyn and just shot her in the back of the head twice.
They were shot by a very powerful handgun with a kind of bullets designed to inflict the maximum amount of damage.
They were both shot multiple times, and the cause of death was the sanguination due to gunshot wounds.
Ken died from a gunshot that pierced his aorta, and Carolyn died from gunshot wounds to her head. Whoever did the shooting approached on the driver's side. The window was down, shot Ken first, and then attempted to shoot at Carolyn. Carolyn exited. The shooter came back around and confronted Carolyn. We believe that he either hit her or pushed her to the ground. She had like gravel scrapings on her knee, and there was blood smear on the right rear quarter panel, and her shoe had fallen off.
Why did the stalls pull to the side of the road? Didn't even turn off the car. Why did the driver's side window go down? Who is this person or persons who came up and started shooting? And why did he kill them?
November 1999. 57-year-old Kenneth Stahl and his wife, 44-year-old Carolyn Obi-Stahl, are found dead in their car on a remote part of the Ortega Highway. Investigators have gathered crucial evidence from the crime scene and the autopsies, but they still have no definite leads in the case.
They said, well, it could have been a murder-suicide, but as you look at the horrendous injuries here, not likely. It could have been a random assault by just somebody passing by. People don't just randomly kill without taking something as a possession. And third, it could have been a hit where there was an arranged murder.
It just didn't make sense. This is not the kind of place you would do a robbery. It's not the kind of place you would do a carjacking. And how would you pull them over? What were the couple doing out in the middle of the Ortega Highway in the middle of the night anyway from Huntington Beach?
Ken Stahl was a 57-year-old anesthesiologist who had his practice in Huntington Beach.
Carolyn was an ophthalmologist, both very successful. The perception was they had an ideal marriage.
Investigators look closely at Ken and Carolyn and their lives together in the affluent coastal community of Huntington Beach.
Carolyn worked at an office in Orange County. Everybody that knew her thought the world of her. She didn't have any enemies that we could find. Everybody liked her.
Kenneth Stahl comes from a very prominent medical family. His father was a pretty well-known surgeon in Southern California and founded his own hospital.
He always compared himself to his father. He wanted to be as good as his father.
Ken had suffered from ongoing health problems prior to his death.
Heart disease ran in the family for Ken. His father actually passed away at an early age.
Not only did Ken's father die young of a heart attack, but his grandfather as well. And Ken had had a couple of heart issues and had bypass surgery.
He exercised incessantly. People would say he was a health freak, that he wanted to live and be free of the heart disease which plagued him.
Ken and Carolyn's marriage is of particular interest to investigators.
They are talking to friends, family of the Stahls, and they get a slightly different picture of this couple than people thought.
Carolyn's sister came forward to speak to the original investigators and told a whole story of everything about their relationship.
Right after Ken's first bypass, he meets Carolyn. They apparently hit it off right away. They don't date very long, and they get married in Las Vegas on New Year's Eve, 1988.
He had already been married, she was already married, and they thought that this could be the one.
A lot of people said that Carolyn was a gold digger because she saw a very wealthy man and went after him, but it was Ken's mother who was so enamored with Caroline. She thought she was good for him.
Ken ended up marrying Carolyn for his mom. His mom fell in love with Carolyn and thought that she would be the perfect wife for him.
As time went on after they got married, no, she's not good for me. He was very unhappy. He said he was Dr. Nobody because he didn't have the kind of life that he wanted.
Carolyn really tried to hide the fact that her marriage was not really a marriage, that Ken had a wandering eye.
Ken was a serial philanderer, and even when he married Carolyn, he still continued to have one girlfriend after another.
One time she went back east, and when she came back from her trip, she finds an unknown female sitting in her living room eating food. She confronts the girl, and the girl leaves. She confronts Ken. He says, "Hey, you knew the way I was when you married me."
They had financial problems. That beautiful house they used to live in, $700,000 house, Ken had to sell, and they downsized to a condo. Nice condo, but it ain't a mansion.
For Christmas, she would go out and buy all sorts of gifts for herself. Earrings, perfume, dresses, and she would wrap them up and she'd put them on the Christmas tree, and she'd tell her friends that, "Look what Ken got me, look what Ken got me." But the family knew it was not the truth.
The couple did not have the marriage that people thought that they had. Neither one of them really wanted a divorce, but for different reasons.
The stories about doctors who go through divorces, particularly in Orange County, are legend. To the point where the doctors who practice there say, I ain't going through no divorce.
Carolyn had already been divorced. Her first husband cheated on her as well. She didn't want to give up on the idea of having that perfect Orange County marriage.
The couple had vicious, loud fights, and people saw bruises on Carolyn. And while they had no proof, they seriously wondered whether she was abused by Ken.
Investigators are now aware that the relationship between Ken and Carolyn Stahl was fractious, and it is at this point that they receive new information from Ken's sister.
There is usually an estate or some kind of winding up and looking at the finances of the deceased. Ken's sister started going through his banking records.
She said, "I found all his money. There's $30,000 missing from his account, and I can't account for it."
I had his bank accounts and I had his actual checkbook with a ledger in it. Just cash withdrawals. They didn't have a destination for him.
The $30,000 was a key. Why is he missing $30,000 from his account?
Ken's pager is recovered from the car and examined by technical experts.
People that don't know what pagers are, they're just a little square thing that you had on your hip, and you punch in a phone number and it would send a message, 000XOXOXO. That was a major form of communication that people used to get messages back then.
The tech team discover one phone number in particular that appears multiple times on Ken's pager on the day of the murders.
Original investigators pulled his phone records or his pager records, and we found half a dozen to 10 pages consistently calling, like somebody wanted to get a hold of him very, very bad. 911, 911, 911, 911.
The phone number belongs to 33-year-old Adriana Vasco. Police track her down and bring her in for questioning.
She said that she was a receptionist that worked for him at his pain clinic, and that she was calling him because he had offered to have a computer repaired for her because they had this platonic working relationship. And she described him as kind of a mentor at that time.
Adriana's interview raises the suspicions of the police, but she continues to deny any involvement in the murders and is released without charge.
We knew that she wasn't being honest with us, and we were sure that she knew more about what had happened than what she was telling us. We really didn't key on anything she said at that point because we didn't have enough information to know the veracity of her statements were.
Investigators suspect there may have been more to Adriana's working relationship with Kenneth Stahl.
Detective McDonald never really believed the whole "I paged Ken to fix my computer" story. The more the detective knows about Ken's philandering, the more he suspects, that Adriana was probably one of his women.
We found out that she wasn't merely a receptionist. The business wasn't what she presented, and people were telling us that they had a romantic relationship in addition to just being an employee. So we went back and we talked to her again. She admitted that she had more of a relationship with him, but it wasn't what it seemed like.
She admitted to having a brief affair with him. He was a doctor, giving her gifts and showing her all sorts of attention, and she felt smitten with him, and they went out and they had an affair.
The community of Orange County are outraged by the violent murders, and the Sheriff's Department is under pressure to quickly solve the case.
They were kind of at a dead end. You know, that there were a few things that they were looking at related to his business, maybe it was an insurance thing. They really didn't have anything concrete in those first 9 months.
The case is reassigned to a new team who re-examine the notes and evidence previously collected.
My sergeant came up to me and he goes, "I got something for you." And he grabbed a 3-inch binder and he said, "This is stall murders. Let's see what you can do with this," and handed it to me.
I went through the case with him, explaining what we'd done and where we were going and what our thoughts were at the time. I also told him that we were looking for Adriana for that 4th interview, and I suggest that they start with her and try and get that 4th interview and find out what she would give up to them.
They had a sense that Adriana just wasn't pushed enough. They were convinced she knew things, and that if they just figured out a way to pressure that information out of her, maybe the case could be revived.
At that time, we didn't know exactly what her involvement is. All we know is that she is the key. She knows more than what she's telling investigators.
Orange County, California. The investigation into the murders of 57-year-old Kenneth Stahl and his wife Carolyn has been reassigned to a new team of detectives. The married couple had been shot dead in their car on the Ortega Highway 9 months earlier, in November 1999.
We went through many scenarios when we started looking at the case. I mean, we thought about snipers, we thought about road rage. We even thought maybe there was like a serial killer that was impersonating a police officer, or it could have been like a gang initiation. There were so many scenarios that went through our head.
Detectives have identified one particular person of interest that they want to speak to, 33-year-old Adriana Vasco.
We felt the key is Adriana. She had to have known more. Listening to the audio recordings of the original interviews, just something didn't seem right.
Adriana's phone number appeared multiple times on Kenneth's pager the day he and Carolyn were murdered.
I knew where she was living. I was knocking on her door. She just wouldn't return my calls for like about 2 weeks. So finally one day we just drove up on her when she got off of work. She was working at a medical center in Costa Mesa. She was walking out to her car, walked up, we identified ourselves. I go, "Do you remember me? I was calling you all those times." And she goes, "Oh yeah." So we invited her, "Hey, could you come talk to us?"
Adriana agrees to be interviewed at the Orange County Sheriff's Office in Stanton.
It was just a brief conversation. It was maybe like 45 minutes. She kind of reiterated the exact same story that she told the original investigators. She had a baby, a young child, a little girl, and the father of that child was Greg Stewart. She was living with the Stewarts in Westminster. Greg's her son. Our curiosity was very high on who is this individual, because that was certainly another possible suspect. He was a military background, comfortable with weapons. He certainly could shoot somebody. We pulled Greg aside. "Hey, Greg, if you were us, who would you be looking at?" And that's when Greg said, "I bet look at your new boyfriend, Tony." We're like, "Tony? Who's Tony?" He was a maintenance man that worked at her apartment complex in Anaheim. Got back to our office and we started working up some stuff, and we pulled up phone records from the Stewart's house. The day after we spoke to her the first time, she was making about a dozen calls to Greenville, North Carolina. We didn't know what that connection was.
Why is this woman calling North Carolina from Orange County, California? Police now have enough evidence to get a search warrant to search through a storage facility that Adriana uses. And in the storage facility, they find a very interesting piece of paper, an application to work at the Avanti apartment complex as a handyman manager.
We sent another team of investigators to go try to identify who he is. They end up finding ID from the manager, his cooperative, says there's his employment records, here's his driver's license. His name is Tony Satin.
The race is now on to find Tony Satin.
We looked every which way, and we can't find any record of any Tony Satin with that date of birth existing anywhere.
Police have a picture of Tony Satin. They send it to the sheriff of Pitt County, North Carolina. The sheriff looks at the picture and says, "Yeah, I know. We call him the Weasel."
He actually went by the nickname the Weasel because he had a weasel tattooed on his torso. He did all different kinds of crime, but he had never done murder, so they were very shocked to see what crime he was now being suspected of.
They identify him as Dennis Earl Godley. He's a notorious criminal for that area, drug dealer, gang member. He's a bad guy, real bad guy.
They were amazed at the criminal background that this Dennis guy, who they knew as Tony, had.
It's at this point that North Carolina detectives are able to provide a break in the case for their fellow investigators in Orange County.
They say, hey, guess what? We know exactly where he is. He's in jail in Virginia on a robbery case. We fly out to the East Coast and we go to the jail where he's at and we conduct an interview with him. I've been involved in a lot of interviews, and this is the first one that lasted like a little over 6 hours. It was a chess match. He wanted to know how much we had, and then we needed to know how much he had. Eventually, he admitted to being on the West Coast, that he was in Anaheim, and he worked as maintenance man at the apartment complex where Adriana lived. So there's the connection. And that was about it. That was about all we had.
At the end of the interview, Dennis Earl Godley makes a comment that captures the attention of the detectives.
Once it went off tape, God said something interesting. He goes, I'm not going to say I did it, but if I did do it, could I do federal time and not be put to death? Why would an innocent man say that? We knew we had our guy.
The team returns to Orange County. They need to find out what Adriana knows about the murders, and they have a plan.
We did search warrants in North Carolina because we knew that his father lived there. We collected computers, we collected everything we could of evidentiary value, but then we had all these warrants we had to do in California as well. We needed to go to the storage units, we needed to go to the Stalls condominium, Huntington Beach. We needed to find out more and more about Adriana.
The cops intercept Adriana in a parking lot after she's at work. They say, come on into the station, we want to talk to you one more time. This time they give her a lie detector test.
We put straps around the chest to measure the respirations. We measure the perspiration on the skin. We measure the temperature of the skin and the heart rate, and whether or not the voice becomes stressed when asked a question.
She failed the lie detector test. There's 3 questions that she failed on. Do you have any idea who killed Ken and Caroline? Were you involved in the murders of Ken and Caroline? And do you know who killed Ken and Caroline? We went in and talked to her again, and she once again denied. And then my partner dropped the bomb on her. He goes, okay, tell us who Tony is. That's when she completely fell back in her chair. Her face went pale white. She crossed her arms, and she just started crying, sobbing. And she immediately goes, I have to go to the bathroom. I have to go to the bathroom.
Detectives now believe they have enough grounds for suspicion to arrest Adriana.
This is enough to convince police that not only does she know something, but she's probably involved. Polygraph's not even admissible, it's just suspicious. They still don't have enough evidence to arrest her in the murder.
She had also outstanding traffic warrants. They exercised their right to arrest her and they put her into jail.
They're able to separate her from her child, try to get her to confess.
Godley now sends a chilling warning to Adriana from his prison cell in Virginia.
He had made some vain threats against Adriana that I have people back there that'll take care of business. He's a bad person, and he does have contacts over here on the West Coast. We contacted the stewards, and we tell them that we've identified Tony Sat as Dennis Earl Godley. Please be careful.
Then investigators receive an unexpected call that they believe will break the case.
About 3 days later, I got a phone call, and it's a collect call from an inmate from LA County Jail. And I accept the call, and it's Adriana. She wants to talk. Got in our cars, drove up to Twin Towers, which is LA County, downtown LA. We sat down to interview her in a little jail cell, and that's when we got her side of the story.
She tells them that yes, she knows who Tony is. He had told her that he would do the murder for hire.
She puts all the blame on Ken and Godley, that they were the ones that were manipulating her. They were the ones that were driving everything. Ken was relentless at just hounding her to find somebody to kill his wife.
She told Ken all about Tony, and then Ken had gotten in touch with Tony and that he had agreed with Tony that there would be a hit on the wife for $30,000. It would take place on Ortega Highway where it was remote, and that Tony would drive out behind Ken and Carolyn, and when the car stopped, Tony would approach the car and he would kill Carolyn.
Ken did something that made Godley fearful or distrust Ken. And you gotta remember Godley's background, he doesn't trust anybody. You know, he's the weasel. If you're between him and freedom, he'll take you out.
But will Adriana's testimony be enough to convict Dennis Earl Godley in court for the murders of Ken and Carolyn Stahl? Orange County, California. Police have arrested Adriana Vasco and her ex-boyfriend Dennis Earl Godley for the murders of Kenneth and Carolyn Stahl. The Stahls were gunned down as they sat in their parked car on a remote part of the Ortega Highway.
We filed charges on Dennis Earl Godley and Adriana Vasco. Both of them were charged for 2 counts of first-degree murder.
The police and the prosecutors felt they had enough to charge first-degree murder with special circumstances calling for the death penalty.
A preliminary hearing is held in March 2021, but investigators receive an unexpected setback in their case against Vasco and Godley.
It was a Judge Dickey out of Southwest Orange County Court. He threw out all of Adriana's testimonies, her the original one in Stanton, the one in Costa Mesa, and the one in LA County Jail. He said it was coerced. That left us in dire strait, actually.
You always want a video of the person doing it, or a confession, or an eyewitness, DNA, whatever, and they didn't have any of that. They had to build this outrageous story about a doctor and a girl from the other side of the tracks and her bad boy boyfriend, and the ophthalmologist who got in the way. They had to construct a tale that is almost too outrageous to be true.
Police continue to build their case against Adriana Vasco and Dennis Earl Godley, despite the lack of hard evidence connecting them to the murders.
They had significant circumstantial evidence. They had the phone calls, the phone records, plus not everything that Adriana said was excluded by the judge. There was significant information that the police had gotten outside of the jailhouse interrogation.
There was a runaway girl that was living with Adriana at the time. We identified her and interviewed her, and she said that they came back after the shooting, and she saw some blood on Godley's boots. They were kind of giddy, having fun, they were laughing. He was kind of like cocky, like, I shot that, and flicked the shell casing at her and said, here's a souvenir to prove it.
More information comes to light about an earlier attempt by Ken to hire a hitman to kill his wife, Carolyn.
Ken did some really brazen things. He asked a few people. One was his electrician. He thought that he would do it because he was an ex-gang member.
He was an ex-gang member, he had a troubled youth, but he pulled himself out of it. He was an individual that turned his whole life around. He felt he wanted to tell the truth about something. So we went and interviewed him, and we found out that Ken had called him to do some work on his house, some type of electrical stuff.
Ken gets to talking. He said, were you in a gang, you know? And yeah, I was younger. I put that aside and I found religion. I just don't do that anymore. Ken says, well, you sure you don't do it anymore, you know? You ever use a gun before? Yeah, I used a gun, you know. Would you use a gun for me? What are you talking about? He says, would you kill my wife?
He flat out said, will you kill my wife? And the electrician was like, no, get a divorce.
Then a new break in the case comes from an unlikely source.
When they were arrested, it was like, boom, this explosion went off with regard to this case. Because it had been dormant, we hadn't been paying attention to it, and then all of a sudden, it's back in the news. Who are these people? Who is Adriana Vasco? Who is Godley? And so, it was a highly competitive media market at that time. Every TV station was chasing it. We were chasing it. All the search warrants in California had been sealed. So to be able to search something, you have to lay out your case. But I got a tip that there was a search warrant served in North Carolina with regard to Godley. I made some phone calls and was able to get my hands on that search warrant, and it kind of laid out the sheriff's department's case.
Bill Rams did a great job with this. After this came out, he made an attempt to get a story. He wanted to talk to Dennis Earl Godley.
I wrote him a letter and said, hey, here's what they're saying about you. Call me anytime. I want to hear your side of the story. Godley called me, which was a shock. And so during my interview with him, he said that he didn't know who Stahl was, that Adriana was one of many women that he dated, and that he had nothing to do with it.
Bill Rams reaches out to Adriana, hoping she will tell him her side of the story.
If I could get this to Adriana, she might be interested in knowing what he's saying.
He showed up at the Orange County Jail one day during general visiting hours.
And so I wrote her a short note that said something to the effect of, hey, I talked to Dennis. If you want to know what he said, give me a call.
Adriana sees the note, and so she agrees to talk to him. And then everything changed at that point in time.
And so I told her what Dennis had told me, and then she started crying, and then she opened up a little bit about it's not true what Dennis was saying, and that she didn't want to be involved in it.
She makes a stunning admission. Adriana admits that she was out there on Ortega Highway that night with her friend Tony Satin, aka Dennis Godley, and that Dennis committed the murders. That she didn't know what was going to happen. She couldn't stop it. That she was terrified.
The breaking news story comes as a shock to the police investigators.
My partner and I were carpooling at the time, and I pull up in front of his house, and he grabbed his Orange County Register paper, and he opens up, and he goes, oh my God. So we got into our office, and then we read the whole story, and that's exactly what she told us.
It does create a interesting First Amendment battle. Can they drag Bill Rams into court and force him to testify? Can they subpoena his notes? Is he protected by the journalist shield law?
In California, there's a thing called the shield law. And the shield law protects the newspaper from being forcibly disclosing confidential information which is given to that newspaper reporter. But there was enough which he had included in the article.
I was subpoenaed because the prosecution was going to use the article as evidence against her at the trial.
Once she was kind of on the record admitting to things she had not admitted for years to anybody before, that's when the case turned.
Adriana Vasco's trial begins in November 2002.
She used a psychologist from UCLA, very prominent, very good, and testified that she was afraid of Dennis, that Dennis intimidated her, and she testified to all the threats that Dennis made, and that she was involuntarily involved in the relationship, and so her conduct was the product of a battered woman.
Once the judge allowed Bill Rams' testimony to stand, then she had to try to defend herself for this domestic violence controlling thing. But the jury saw right through it, just like we saw it right through the very first.
Since the murders of Kenneth and Carolyn Stahl, Adriana Vasco is found guilty by the Orange County Superior Court.
Adriana is convicted of first-degree murder in Carolyn's death, second-degree murder in Ken's, and she got life in prison without the possibility of parole.
She wanted what Carolyn had. She wanted to be Mrs. Kenneth Stahl. She wanted the rest of her life to be taken care of.
She wanted the fancy clothes, the nice car, to live in a nice house. She wanted everything that Carolyn had and everything that she stood for.
In May 2004, Dennis Earl Godley pleads guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder in exchange for not receiving the death penalty. He is sentenced to life in prison without parole.
Everybody else in this group kind of sort of normal. They're not criminals. They don't have violent pasts. So he's the odd man out as far as the criminal background and the criminal activity.
Godley's a psychopath. He's just a stone-cold killer. He died in prison of cancer.
The family and friends of Kenneth and Carolyn Stahl are left wondering how a crime like this could have happened.
Carolyn did not deserve this at all. She wanted a happy marriage. That's not what she ended up getting, but she fought for it. She did. She tried. You know, she knew about his numerous affairs and tried to work through it. She just wanted love.
The doctors don't want to go through these divorces, and certainly Ken Stahl did not want to go through the divorce and lose so much. He decided it would be so much better and so much cheaper just to do away with his wife.
Here's a doctor, educated, had everything for him, and he turns out to be involved in the murder of his wife, who just loved him unconditionally. And even though it was through his infidelities, though his selfishness, the times he would go hanging out in seedy areas, she still loved him. She still wanted him.
The community of Orange County is shocked by the murders of the Stahls.
In Orange County, they don't want their doctors in the middle of a messy love triangle, hiring hitmen to kill their wives and then the hitman double-crossing them and killing them. What started out as, oh my gosh, maybe it was a carjacking, a robbery, how sad, how terrible, what a loss to the community, became kind of a really tawdry story about the dark side of Orange County.